Most women are taught to stay. Stay soft, stay small, stay agreeable, even when the soul begins to rot in the silence of unmet needs. But some choose differently. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't throw dishes. She simply leaves. Not out of impulse, but from something far more terrifying: clarity. And that clarity becomes the most dangerous thing a man will ever feel. Because when a woman walks away, truly walks, not to provoke, not to manipulate, not to threaten, but to reclaim, she becomes the mirror of his shadow, and he can never unsee what she showed him. Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But in many modern dynamics, it is only the woman who bends, only the woman who becomes liquid, while the man remains stone, until she realizes it is not love if only one soul is allowed to grow. The feminine archetype has long been misunderstood, mistaken for servitude, mistaken for sacrifice. But the true feminine is not submissive. She is magnetic. She is not the caretaker of his ego. She is the disruptor of illusions. And nothing disrupts a man's illusion more than her absence. When she walks away, she doesn't just leave the room. She takes the warmth, the gravity, the echo of his future. And in that cold, hollow silence, he begins to feel what he has never allowed himself to feel: dependence, vulnerability, loss. This is not punishment. It is alchemy. A man does not chase a woman simply because she's gone. He chases what her absence awakens: the echo of the mother he never fully mourned, the lover he couldn't possess, the power he once had and misused. You see, every woman who walks away stirs the archetype of the anima within him, the inner feminine that he has rejected, silenced, or distorted. And when she is no longer there to externalize it, he is forced to meet her within. That is where the real chaos begins. But what about her? The woman who walks away is not cold. She is not cruel. She is the woman who learned, often through heartbreak, that love without boundaries is not love at all, but self-erasure. She has cried on bathroom floors. She has begged the universe to explain why she was never enough. She has tried everything: over-explaining, over-loving, overstaying. And then one day, she just stopped. Not because she didn't care, but because her nervous system finally screamed louder than his excuses. Because she realized that her silence is more honest than his words. Because the cost of staying became greater than the fear of being alone. In Jungian psychology, this is the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. When a woman stops waiting for external validation and begins honoring her internal compass, she steps into her archetypal power. No longer the wounded maiden seeking a savior, she becomes the sovereign queen, not one who rules over others, but one who reigns over herself. And here lies the paradox. The more she detaches from needing him, the more he begins to need her. This is not manipulation. This is the psychology of polarity. Men are drawn to what they cannot possess, the ungraspable, the woman who doesn't orbit around his moods, the woman who doesn't beg to be seen because she sees herself. Her absence creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum he meets something he's spent a lifetime avoiding: his own emotional helplessness. You may be that woman. Maybe you're there now, halfway out the door, heart heavy with guilt, wondering if leaving is too dramatic, too final. But ask yourself, how many times have you stayed, hoping that your loyalty would finally be enough to make him change? How many times have you silenced your instincts to preserve his comfort? The truth is, every time you abandon yourself for someone else, you teach them how to do the same. The woman who walks away doesn't always have a plan. She may walk into uncertainty, into the ache of solitude, into nights where the silence is deafening. But she also walks into freedom, into truth, into a life that doesn't require her to shrink. This power, the dark power, is not darkness as in evil. It is darkness as in depth, mystery, unyielding inner knowing. It is the feminine in her full, wild form. Not dressed in approval, but wrapped in her own skin. She is no longer seeking love from the outside in. She has become the source. And that, more than anything, is what terrifies the ego of the man who let her go. But here's where it turns. When a man feels the echo of her absence, not just the logistical absence, but the energetic one, something ancient begins to stir in him. Not all men will respond. Many will distract, detach, demonize. They will tell themselves she was too much, too emotional, too dramatic. This is the ego's way of surviving rupture. It projects what it cannot process. But deep beneath those defenses, something else lingers, and regret. Not just regret over losing her, but regret over never truly seeing her. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine inner figure within the male unconscious. For a man, this anima is his gateway to creativity, feeling, soul. If undeveloped, she becomes a projection, an image he casts onto women, rather than a truth he lives with within. And so, when a powerful, integrated woman exits his life, the projection collapses. The mirror is shattered. He no longer sees her. He is forced to see himself. And for many men, this is unbearable. Because to see himself clearly, his avoidance, his manipulation, his emotional dependence masked as dominance would require radical self-confrontation. And not every man is ready to meet that kind of truth, especially when it's delivered in the shape of a woman who no longer needs him. But some men, some will be changed forever. Not because she pleaded, not because she begged, but because her silence was the loudest sermon he ever heard. He may not come back. He may never speak a word. But somewhere inside of him, a seed has been planted, the knowing that there was a woman who embodied the kind of love he couldn't receive. A woman whose love required depth, truth, presence, and he wasn't ready. That knowledge doesn't fade. It haunts. And the woman? She doesn't wait. She doesn't pause her growth in the hope that he awakens. She builds, she heals, she expands. Not as a performance, but as a return to essence. She begins to see her own patterns too, the ways she overgave, the wounds she romanticized, the red flags she painted white. This is her shadow work. Because walking away isn't just a message to him, it's a reckoning with herself, a vow to never abandon her own soul again for someone else's potential. In the mythology of the feminine psyche, this is the rebirth. From maiden to mother, not in the biological sense, but the archetypal one. She becomes the woman who holds herself, the woman who stays with herself even when no one else does. And suddenly, her value is not negotiable. Her softness is no longer exploited. Her standards are not up for debate. Because once a woman realizes that her love is sacred, she no longer offers it to men who treat it like it's ordinary. That is the dark power of the woman who walks away. She does not walk to punish. She walks to remember who she is. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. After she walks away, a void is created. But this is no ordinary emptiness. It is a sacred vacuum, one that pulls from the unconscious, one that unmasks illusions. To him, it may feel like loss, rejection, punishment. But in truth, it is an invitation. An invitation to feel what he has avoided for years, maybe for a lifetime. Without her energy to orbit around, without her emotional labor to hold the tension, he is left with himself. And for the emotionally unevolved man, that is the most terrifying place to be. This is where Jung's idea of the shadow becomes painfully real. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. Now, the darkness is conscious. The conversations he replayed in his head, the apologies he never made, the little betrayals not just of her, but of his own soul. It all rushes forward now, not as punishment, but as mirror. And meanwhile, she has begun the real work, not the work of moving on in the superficial sense, but the sacred labor of returning to herself. She reclaims the pieces she scattered to keep the relationship alive. She begins to see that what she called love was sometimes just fear wearing perfume. fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. But when she faced that silence, the night she didn't text him, the morning she didn't check her phone, the week she spent crying on and off without reaching out, something ancient began to heal. The part of her that always apologized first, the part that over-explained, that over-cared, that over-functioned for two, that part started to dissolve. And in its place emerged something quieter, but far more powerful: self-trust. She no longer needs to prove her worth to someone who couldn't see it. She no longer leaks energy into chasing connection that must be begged for. And here's the secret. That energy, the energy of a woman who walks away and doesn't look back, becomes radiant. It hums in her silence. It glows in her boundaries. It turns heads not because she is trying to attract, but because she is no longer available. Not unavailable in the wounded sense, but unavailable to anything that dims her light, erodes her peace, or asks her to become smaller than she is. She does not hate him. She may still, on some quiet nights, miss him. But she no longer misses the version of herself that stayed. And that is what changes everything. Time passes, and with it, illusions dissolve. The man who once took her presence for granted begins to feel it. Not in a loud way, not in any way he can fully articulate, but in the small spaces, in the pause before he reaches for his phone, in the ache that follows a new woman who doesn't challenge him, in the echo of a laugh that used to belong to someone who loved him for real. And then, maybe it's a message. Maybe he reappears months later, just checking in. Maybe it's subtle. Maybe it's desperate. But the reach will come, because no man ever truly forgets the woman who became the mirror for his unconscious. And when he does return, she is no longer the woman he left behind. She doesn't respond with anger. She doesn't respond with longing. She listens with her body now, not her wounds. And her body speaks clearly. I am no longer available to be the place where your healing happens, while mine is postponed. You see, when a woman walks away, it's not about walking from him. It's about walking back to herself. And when she does this fully, she no longer seeks closure from the one who broke her open, because her wholeness is no longer up for negotiation. She has reclaimed her rhythm. She has learned that silence is not a threat, it is a sanctuary. She has learned that being alone is not loneliness, it is liberation. And most importantly, she has remembered this truth. She was never too much. She was simply asking to be met soul to soul. And when a man cannot meet her there, she does not shrink. She ascends. This is the full arc of the woman who walks away. She enters the fire of absence. She faces the shadows of codependency. She releases the need to be chosen, and she becomes the chooser. Her presence becomes rarer. Her gaze more discerning. Her love less accessible but infinitely more sacred. And the man who once thought he had time now realizes she wasn't just another woman. She was the one who forced him to face himself. He may chase her ghost forever, but the real her? She's no longer waiting. She's building. She's thriving. She's loving herself, her life, maybe another man who has done his shadow work. And she'll never again have to walk away, because she'll never again stay where her soul isn't seen. That is the dark power of the woman who walks away. Not vengeance, not ego, just truth, wrapped in mystery, laced with softness, anchored in unshakable self-worth, a living embodiment of the divine feminine, not in theory, but in motion. And that, as Jung would say, is the moment her individuation is complete.